Hello, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Music. I'm your host, Thomas Corley. I want to thank you for joining us on our musical journey through the many genres of music. This week, we are going to close out our series on the many styles of Christian music. Our guest this week is the very Reverend Professor Martyn Percy. He is the Dean of Christ Church, one of the many schools at the University of Oxford. Dr. Percy, welcome to Meet the Music.
Tom, it's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for this invitation. And hello from the old country, as it were, to all the listeners overseas in America. It's really good to be with you. And I know you're speaking to me from Michigan, Tom. It's one of my favorite states in the USA. I can't tell you which is the favorite one, of course, but I do love Michigan. I had some very, very happy times there.
Great. So let's just kick it right off. What came first, your journey to divinity or your appreciation for jazz music?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I think the first thing to say about me and music and my music is that I grew up in a house where there were really no books. I'm first generation to go to university. My parents thought that was very strange. They didn't read a lot. There were a few books. My father had a set of encyclopedias, which he'd bought from a traveling salesman. And I remember when I was about 11, just reading my way through these encyclopedias, one after the other, letter A stuff, letter B stuff, and so forth. And one of the things that fascinated me in these encyclopedias were all these entries on composers, Brahms, Beethoven, and much else, really. And what my parents did have was a kind of a small set of vinyl LPs, which in England were known as, 100 great classics. So they had everything on them that would be the sort of top 100 sort of classical bits of music. Beethoven's Ninth, a bit of Tchaikovsky, 1812. Maybe a little bit of Vaughan Williams. And I remember listening to this stuff, and nobody else in my house listened to it. I'm thinking, my goodness, I find this really moving. For me, it was, I don't think I could have ever used this word when I was about 11 years of age, but I found it transcendent. It took me to another place, and that stayed with me. My parents, by the way, listened to Andy Williams, Perry Como, and the Carpenters, and just very occasionally, if they were letting their hair down, the Beach Boys.
Okay.
But I got into my very early adolescence. I got into it in a really big way into the Beatles. Now, I'm 58. I was born in 1962.
Same
so
here.
At the time, great. So by the time I got into the Beatles, they were finished. I mean, they were gone. But I remember listening to Abbey Road, and particularly the B-side of that vinyl, where it's Golden Slumbers and Polythene Pam. And I listened to that and I thought to myself, you know what this is? This is an opera. And actually at the time, cruising up to number one in the UK was Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, which of course is also an opera, but rock music.
So this was the 70s.
Yeah, I was putting these things together in my head and thinking, isn't this interesting what this music is doing? It's giving you drama, it's giving you image, it's giving you a narrative. You're asked to remember, these, she came in through the bathroom window. What on earth does that mean? And it was strange for me, but all the time, as I was listening to the Beatles and almost nothing else, actually, I had no time really at the time for punk or any of the kind of glam rock stuff in the early to mid-70s. But I was just feasting privately on classical music. And then I think my next memory is of going to university. And I went into a friend's kind of room for tea and playing on her gramophone, her record player, was Allegri Miserere. And I we have a phrase here in England. I was gobsmacked. I don't know if that means anything in America, but what it means is I couldn't speak. I literally was reduced to silence. And I listened to the first sort of 10 notes over and over again, and I thought, those notes have been minted in heaven. That is the currency of what God must be listening to each day. So my relationship with music was classical, increasingly choral music, particularly high forms of that. And out of that, I managed to find one record that my father had, which was, I don't think he ever played it. I never heard him play it, but I played it over and over again, and it'll be familiar to all your listeners. I fell in love with Miles Davis.
Wow.
And Kind of Blue.
Right.
For me, that was, virtually 1 hour of just pure perfection. And it led me into bossa nova, Stan Getz.
Yeah.
It began to fuse me into the kind of cool jazz that is familiar on the west coast of America.
Correct.
Particularly South American jazz notes. And I began to think, and in the end, of course, I began to write about this stuff. So, yeah. So that's a little bit of kind of, I suppose that's a bit of a synopsis of how I found my music. We also have in the United Kingdom a long-running radio show called Desert Island Discs, which was created by a man called Roy Plumley, and they take celebrities, people in public life, interesting people, sometimes writers, authors, and they let them choose 8 tracks that they would take with them on their desert island.
Oh, okay.
And we'll talk a little bit about each one of those tracks, which I'll come to in a minute. And then they allow you to take a book with you. They give you Shakespeare and the Bible. They're always in there.
Okay.
But then you have to choose another book, a third book. And then you have to choose a luxury, and you can't take anybody with you, so you can't say, I'll take my partner or anything like that. But you might say, well, I just want to draw, or actually what I really want is, I don't know, a knife and fork or something. But you can't take a radio or a TV or a computer. And then they say, now, what would your favourite track be? What's the one thing you're going to play pretty well every day? And my answer to that has been the same answer, I think, probably now for the best part of 40 years. And I'm playing Nina Simone, My Baby Just Cares.
Wow.
I just love that. And it's my wife and I's favourite song. And every time it goes on, my kids who are in their late 20s now, they're hideously embarrassed because the moment any radio station plays, my wife and I, Emma, we just stand up and we start dancing. And if you want to embarrass your kids, just dance in front of them, anytime.
Right. Love it, love it, love it. So what was the spark to write about jazz? I mean, in particular, was it an essay? Your jazz and
yeah,
okay.
It was. As I was saying earlier, I mean, I'm first generation university. I went off to a normal secular university, and I read theology and religious studies. You might call it divinity in the US, but it was I'd say a fairly secular way of teaching religious studies. I really enjoyed that. And when I got to the end of that degree, I was 21, and I was thinking about doing a doctorate, but I didn't really know why. I had some ideas about that. But in fact, I got sort of seduced, really, I don't think there's a better word for it, into going off to work in publishing. And so for the first 5 years of my adult life after university, I worked in marketing and promotion and public relations for different publishers, specializing largely in religious and reference books. I was going back to that kind of time when I'd been, 10 and 11, encyclopedias, things like that I was writing. And all the time this music was being fed. And when I was probably in my mid-20s, a sort of series of events came together, and I thought to myself, I should really offer myself for ordination in the Church of England or the Episcopalian Church. And I have to say, I did this very, very half-heartedly, because to be completely frank, I wasn't really sure I wanted to do this. And I was kind of secretly hoping that they would say no, and then I would have just carried on with my career, which I loved. But the church said yes, and they took me on to train. But because my first degree was theology and religious studies, I was given a free pass to do a doctorate. And this raised a really interesting question for me, Tom, because there were lots of subjects I thought I should be interested in. And I duly sort of filed a submission, and the university accepted it, the church accepted it. But with about, I think it was only 3 days to go before starting at seminary and at another university, I ran into a friend. And he said, well, what are you doing in this doctorate? And I explained what I was doing. And he said, well, it sounds incredibly boring. Good grief, what on earth? What on earth are you doing that for? I said, well, I don't. I said, it just seemed like a good idea at the time. He said, yeah. He said, oh dear, I mean, that's not going to turn any heads, is it? I said, well, okay. What should I do? And he said, you've always been interested in American fundamentalism. And I said, that's right, I have. I've always been interested in that. I've read Jerry Falwell. I've looked at all of these strange sort of mega churches. I've been fascinated with them for a long time, and I've been fascinated by how they worship and the music they play. And he said, right. He said, well, you should follow your passion. That's your doctorate. So what happened next was I turned up at university. I met my supervisor, and he said, I've read your plan. That's great. Here's what we're going to do. And I said, no, I've had a complete change of mind. I'm going to do this. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, right. He said, well, his words to me were, why are you studying fundamentalism? This was in the in the late 1980s, because nobody will be interested in fundamentalism in the 21st century. Quote. I've always remembered the quote because, the first 20 odd years of the 21st century have been about nothing else but fundamentalism, really.
Right.
What happened then was that I started to read about power, charisma, mood, ethos, aesthetics. And I started to write about how these fundamentalists that I was studying, a group of Californian fundamentalists actually, that actually they weren't like, caricatures of fundamentalists. It wasn't that they believed a great deal and they didn't have lots of fundamentals. What they loved was the mood and the music in which they worshipped. And they got all their religious experience out of that. So to put it into, I suppose, a fairly kind of tight phrase, as the Pentecostals would say, they reaped what they sowed. The God they sang out, the God they celebrated in their worship, the God they moved their bodies to when they danced and swayed and raised their hands and spoke in tongues, the God that they testified to in that worship was the God that they experienced. And so I wrote a thesis about the interconnection between what people's preference and ideology in music and worship was, and how that fed and to a large extent shaped their experience of God. So if you sing about God being near and touching you, and God feeling you and feeling your pain, and that's set to a slow and moody and bright but very repetitive chorus, it's not a great surprise that people at the end of a 1, 2, 3 hour revival meeting saying, I really felt the presence of God. I really felt God touch me. I really felt God connected with my pain, because actually you've done nothing else but sing about it.
Right.
So you're if you like, social construction of reality lies in the worship. And so I wrote this, and the thesis was published. I just didn't think very much about it, to be honest. And then about 10 years later, I got this extraordinary invitation from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. So this invitation came from the University of Copenhagen to come and give a talk on the music of revivalism. So I rang them up and I said, I don't think I've ever had an invitation from the Department of Anthropology before to come and give a talk. Can you tell me what the theme of the conference is? And they said, yes, it's you. We're anthropologists and we're studying your methodology. I said, well, really? I said, I don't think I've got one, have I? And they said, well, that's not what we think. So I went over to Copenhagen and listened to quite a number of papers where people had taken hold of what I'd done with this group of fundamentalists by now 12 years earlier. And they had converted that methodology into analyzing Orthodox monks in monasteries chanting, to nuns, Catholic chanting, to worshippers in other kinds of European and American revivalism. And it suddenly struck me that what I'd actually done quite by accident was discover something actually that John Caputo says, just I think quite beautifully. The task of the faithful is to convey the music, the mood of God. And it's not that God has got a mood. It's not that God is moody or angry. But if you think God is warm, tactile, engaged, present, that's what you'll try and reify in your worship and music. If you think God is cool, distant, remote, that's what you'll get. And my experience of going to Pentecostal churches is that the mood of the music is warm and sunny, bordering on hot. I mean, nobody goes to a Pentecostal meeting for a cool experience of God and becoming chilled out. But if you go to a Presbyterian church and you have a hot experience of God, it's going to be very uncomfortable for you because they'll wonder why you're getting so excited. Because God is fighting, God is pretty rational when all's said and done. And this took me into my study of jazz, really, because I suddenly realized that what was interesting for me about Anglicanism and Episcopalianism was the fact that it was jazz-like. It was free-flowing, it was melodic, it was spontaneous, and yet it was also composed. It was very measured, and yet it had excess in it. And yet somehow in the middle of something that seemed quite humdrum, let's take a piece of Coltrane or Davis, you'd suddenly find that the saxophone would come in and lift you 50 feet into the air.
Yeah.
And so I began to write about jazz and musicology and mood and ethos, and really, in a sense, just began to reflect a bit more about what music had done to me as a child. Yeah, I mean, I think the things we read as children and the stories we're told as children and the music we hear as children stays with us probably for most of our lives. We have another radio show in this country called Broadcasting House, and it has a little slot on it called Inheritance Tracks. And a little bit like Desert Island Discs, we invite celebrities onto that, and they get to talk about the tracks that shaped their childhood. So people often say, well, my parents always played this or they always played that. I mean, I would never have found the Carpenters but for the fact my parents played this endlessly. And Carol Carpenter, I still think, has one of the most beautiful voices of the second half of the 20th century in song. The depth of that voice is something you just cannot fake. It's got an authenticity and a realism about it. And you find it sometimes, I think, when you listen to some of Frank Sinatra singing. One of the favourite tracks I have of Sinatra is "Fly Me to the Moon."
Yes.
And there's a note there where he hits, and you think, "Good grief!"
Right.
That's that Allegri and Miserere.
Mm-hmm.
It's another note minted in heaven. It's come from another place.
Right.
It's just absolutely pitch perfect.
Right. I agree totally. Yes, it does the same for me. So okay. So do you foresee? Well, let me back up for a second, because musically, things have been fusing for over 100 years. You've gone from classical to blues to jazz and rock and roll and country. So do you see a fusion of congregational music and jazz, or do you see jazz being introduced or being adopted into the church as part of worship?
I do. I've observed. I've actually been to a number of congregations. I'm afraid always in the USA, where they've had a jazz mass or a jazz Eucharist or a jazz service. I think the last one I went to was about 8 years ago in Atlanta, and I mean, I just sat there spellbound. It was just extraordinary to hear a normal liturgy set to a piece of jazz. So the fusion is there. I think the thing with jazz is it's still rather left field for a lot of people, and you don't find that idiom coming into much in the way of congregational worship. So where I do find it would be occasionally going to congregations which are a fusion of relatively conservative liturgy, but very free-flowing music. So I'm just going to tell a couple of little stories here about two trips. One to a church in South Africa, in Port Elizabeth, where I was invited to preach years ago now, sort of 10, 15 years ago. And I was out there doing some lectures in the university. And I had my younger son with me at the time. He came out with me carrying my bags, and so we could separate him from his rather cloying girlfriend. It was a good deal. And you know what it's like having a sort of teenager tag along with you.
Sure.
He said, we're going to Port Elizabeth. I said, I'm just going to preach. It shouldn't be too long. It'll be okay. Just behave yourself. You'll have to sit at the front. Sorry. The sermon's not going to be long. I'm preaching. It's been about 10 minutes, really. Well, we turned up at this church, which was one of the birthplaces of the anti-apartheid movement. One of the first places it kicked off in the 1950s. Mm. We were the only white people in a congregation of about 1,000. So I looked very conspicuous, and so I bumped. And we were introduced, much to his embarrassment. But I mean, I've just grown accustomed to this. And the first hymn started, but the church had no musical instruments. It had no organ, no piano. Nobody played anything. But they sang absolutely everything. Everything. And the congregation just knew the music. Mm-hmm. And they just got into it. And the minute the music started, they started to dance. I mean, not excessively, but they move around in the pews from side to side. It's an extraordinary kind of beautiful, swaying congregation. Then came the incense, and just clouds of stuff. I mean, honestly, you could have fumigated Capitol Hill with it. There was just tons of this stuff going absolutely everywhere. Then the choir came, beautifully robed, and then the other choir came in, and then the other choir. There were 5 choirs.
Oh my gosh.
They all came in, differently dressed, and they sang, and they swayed, and they danced. And 1 hour into this, we hadn't had any readings. I was nowhere near preaching. And they were singing everything. And I was looking at my watch thinking, this is interesting. Then they started to translate. My sermon had to be translated into 7 of the 14 official languages of South Africa. Mm. They translated all the jokes as well. But the thing that was really spellbinding for me was the moment they get to the creed. Now, in England, the creed is mumbled. It's like a kind of an ad break, a commercial break between the service of the word and the service of the Eucharist. People just sort of say almost the natural halfway point in the service. Not this congregation. What happened was that the priest, who had sat there impassively throughout the whole service, doing nothing, the minute the creed started, he got up, turned, faced the altar, so his back was to the congregation, and they sang the creed over and over and over again.
Wow.
And he swayed and he danced like David dancing before the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the most raucous, noisiest, but most beautiful melody you could possibly imagine. It was amazing. And my son, who's not really religious, just said, if church was like that, he'd never go because it took 4 hours. But actually, if he had 4 hours, he wouldn't go anywhere else.
Wow.
They study everything. And it's when all the words and all the movements and everything that is done is musical. Fast forward about 7 years ago, I was spending several months in Hartford, Connecticut. I went down to the Church of the Good Shepherd, which is on the other side of the colour line in that city. Again, I was the only white person there. And I vividly remember the vestry, the clergy coming in beforehand into the kind of sacristy, and they said to me, right, we're going to pray with you and pray on you. All this, that's an ominous phrase, isn't it? Pray on you before you preach. I said, that's fine, please go ahead. And he said, well, now we should just warn you that in this service, people like to get a bit involved in the sermon. And I said, oh, right, fine, I'm sure that's okay. What do you mean by involved? And they said, well, if the sermon is going well, they'll probably just stand up and they'll shout, preach it, brother, preach it.
Right.
I said, okay, absolutely fine, I'm okay with that. Don't worry, I'm English, but I can cope. And I said, as a matter of interest, what will happen if it's not going well? And they, they said, that's fine. People will still stand up, but they'll shout, help him, Jesus, help him.
Oh, wow.
Once again, in this congregation, no organ, no musical instruments, everything was sung. The liturgy was 1928, and they sang spirituals from memory. And it was absolutely spine-tingling. If you can imagine a Latin mass fused with spirituals in a beautifully sort of reserved but nonetheless moving black congregation, and at the same time clouds and clouds of incense, the old liturgy with the spirituals, that is incredibly powerful. It really is, and I defy anybody not to be transported by that, because you get from the spirituals the whole sense of a group who understand oppression, but they also understand grace and mercy and peace, and they sing about that, and they sing about forgiveness, and they sing about the life to come, and that other shore that is to come. And yet they do this in a way that's powerfully traditional, and all your senses are hit. The nose by the incense, the eyes by feasting on the delight of this dancing, the ears and the tongue by the music. It's just the most extraordinary sensory experience. Really amazing. But I tend to write about these things now because I think people have to see these things and really understand that music inside worship, when it's fully inhabited, actually just takes you to another place. I'm not saying it takes you to faith or to belief, but it takes you utterly out of yourself. That's what good music does.
Well, yeah, it washes over you.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And I think jazz does that. But I mean, there are great fusions of this. I mean, one of my favourite, if I wasn't choosing Nina Simone, My Baby Just Cared, you see, I would be choosing Jan Garbarek and the Hilliard Ensemble. and officium. And I don't know if your listeners will know that, but it's beautiful Scandinavian music, and it's plain chant fused with jazz saxophone. So you get these voices in the background, and then suddenly, from just right over the valley, comes this beautiful kind of melodic jazz saxophone that just lifts the soul like a lark ascending. And the power of that against the composed, almost formulaic chanting is amazing. And then, of course, what happens is the saxophone drops off, and then the choral music takes over and gets to the same height as the saxophone, and then it drops down, and then the saxophone goes even higher and drops down, and then the music higher and higher. And you feel yourself being moved in this. You feel your soul being almost teased apart gently and opened out like a sort of flower to the rays, the sun rays of God. And suddenly you become a person listening to the music who cannot help blossoming. I mean, there's nothing a flower can do when it faces the sun other than open. And when the music is beautiful like that, it's like rain and sun together. The flower just opens, and you find yourself open too, because you have to receive this, and it feeds you. It nourishes you.
Yes. I love that. That's fantastic. I love the way you put that. I'm gonna have to steal that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, but that's steal away. Yeah.
So, did you have an opportunity to come up with a list?
Oh yeah, I mean, which one do you want? Do you want the inheritance tracks, or do you want my kind of desert island discs?
Well, it's funny that you said that desert island disc thing, because I kind of use I'm gonna have to steal that one too. But I've heard that before. But what I do, I say, if you have a house fire, and this is, of course, speaking to a vinyl collector, and you, everyone's out of the house, the pets, the family are out of the house. What 5 vinyl pieces would you go grab?
Okay, I love questions like this, because I mean, this is like, it's just pure indulgence, isn't it? What it just turns all the switches. It's just such a great question. So look, I'm going to mention some things that I think I love, and I will, I'd stop the car if I heard it on the radio if I could.
Okay.
I love hearing Gregory Porter. I think, that man's voice is like a pillow fluffed by God and his angels.
Isn't he amazing? I just discovered him maybe a few years ago.
Yeah. I mean, nothing not to like there, and his extraordinary repertoire is. I mean, I first heard his "Take Me to the Alleys," which is a lovely gospel song. Actually.
Yes.
Beautiful piece of music. But it's his voice. It's the richness of that voice which is really just so compelling. Yeah. And I love his Water, and also Liquid Spirit, which I still think is one of the great albums so far of this century, actually. Mm. But if I'm choosing jazz, of course I've already mentioned My Baby Just Cares, Nina Simone. I'm going to have, I'm afraid, Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruits. And I know that might tick a box for Black Lives Matter, but I think I want to educate my students these days in where some of these protest songs came from in the 1930s, 50s, 40s, and so forth. And these are haunting songs.
Right.
But they tell us a lot, actually, about where the world has come from, actually. I quite like fun bits of jazz. So if you watch Walt Disney's The Jungle Book, I don't think you can really resist The Bare Necessities or I'm the King of Swingers. They're just great kind of ragtime numbers, aren't they? They're just fantastic. But I think I'm going to have to stick with Nina Simone, My Baby Just Cares. I just love Aretha Franklin's Say a Little Prayer. I think it's just absolutely gorgeous. And I find myself, when it comes on the radio, driving at the speed of that song. And it just makes you feel happy, and it makes you suddenly remember the people who are always in your thoughts and hearts and prayer.
Right.
It's just gorgeous. I'm choosing a little bit of Beatles. I'm going to have, I think, probably A Day in the Life. Orchestrally, that's the end of it's the big song on Sergeant Pepper. But I think the extraordinary way in which Lennon and McCartney did the partnership on that is really amazing. It's a full orchestral song. Actually, it's got the most extraordinary things going on in it musically. I just adore that. I'm going to have my Allegri Miserere, Misa Papa Marcelli, which is just beautiful chanted choral music. And then I'm not sure for about the fifth. I'm kind of wavering here. I think I might take Officium by Jan Garbarek and the Hilliard Ensemble. I'm tempted to by a slightly strange choice here, and it's the Beach Boys, Good Vibrations. And I once heard an interview with one of their number some years ago now, who described Good Vibrations as a hymn to the Virgin Mary and Annunciation. Now, it happens that we're recording this on the eve of Annunciation. Annunciation's March the 25th, the day where the angel visits and says, you shall bear a son. And if you listen to that song and the lyrics in that way, you'll never be able to escape the religious overtones that are present in that song. The way the sunlight plays upon their hair. It's just an extraordinary sense of an epiphany breaking through, and something again transcendent and soul-like taking place. You just listen to it. I find it, complex, rich, anointed, I think is a word I would use.
Wow. Yeah, definitely going to have to listen to that as soon as this session is done. Oh, wow. Did you have Did you have any bonus ones?
Yeah, Bossa Nova is. I know. Bossa Nova is played in auditoriums, hotel lobbies, and in lift music all over the world, really. And I know that, but I still can't get enough of it.
Same here.
Love listening.
Same here.
The Dave Blue and Stan Getz, and any opportunity to do that is just great. The other thing that I've enjoyed over the last few years is that extraordinary series you had on jazz music. And I'm trying to remember his name now. Who did the recent series for you on the Vietnam War? And
Ken Burns.
Yeah, that's right. So he did, I think, 3 or 4 programs on jazz, and he only takes it up to about the end of the 1950s. But so we don't really get into cool jazz, and we don't really get into bossa nova particularly. But I think he's really good on Coltrane and Davis and some of the earlier progenitors there. And I think he's really understood the roots of oppression and resistance to oppression that are present in jazz. And I saw a few years ago a film. One of the things I do in this country is I sit on the board of British filmmakers, the BBFC, which I think is probably federally audited in the USA. So how you get your certificates like X or 18 or 15 or 12A, whatever the categories are in the USA. In this country, I sit on that board in this country, not as a religious figure, but as an educator. And so occasionally I get asked to look at quite tricky films where we're not sure whether it's suitable for adults or suitable for children, or if it's somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
I get to see a lot of films. And one of the ones I saw some years ago was a film called Blue Like Jazz, and it's after a novel by Don Miller. and it's about a kid who is sort of almost forced into a Bible college by his over-religious mother. And his father is a bit of a hippie and left the home long ago and has shacked up with somebody much younger. But what his father gave him, which he can't get rid of, is his collection of jazz vinyl LPs. And he knows he should like the religious music, but he doesn't like it. And whenever he's alone and in private space, he just slips on Coltrane and Davis and all these other greats, really. And what's beautiful about the film and the novel is that he finds his way out of his faith and into, I would say, a more mature understanding of himself and probably of God as well. He finds his way to this through jazz. And it's really interesting. There's a nice passage at the end, which I've just got open here. He says, I never liked jazz music because jazz music doesn't resolve. But I was outside the Baghdad Theatre in Portland one night, and I saw a man playing the saxophone. I stood there 15 minutes, and he never opened his eyes. After that, I liked jazz music. Sometimes you have to watch somebody love something before you can love it yourself. It is, they are showing you the way.
Wow.
I do not like God because God didn't resolve. And then he goes on to say much later that he now sees that all of this mystery that's around it is something that he can begin to see in jazz not resolving, but coming together. So he sort of almost ends the novel with these words. Sometimes you have to watch somebody love something before you can love it. Penny, my girlfriend, he says, loves Jesus. My dad loves jazz. He told me jazz is like life because it doesn't resolve. And he gave me his record collection to prove it. And I've been listening to these records over and over again. But every time I put on John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, I swear I can hear something my father says isn't there. I hear a resolution. Resolution. A final end to the story. I know that not everybody hears the universe this way. But what if Penny is right? What if God is trying to compose something? And what if all those stars above us are just notes on God's page? A page of music swirling in the blue, like jazz.
Wow.
So you've got that extraordinary sense when you look out on the Milky Way on a clear night, and you see that kind of swirl of splodges and stars and smears, and I see jazz. And I see that kind of playful, extraordinary sense you get when you watch a little bit of footage of Coltrane or Davis picking up a saxophone or a trumpet or getting onto the keyboards. And suddenly, out of nothing, there's order, beauty, rhythm, soul, power, sadness, celebration, sensuality, beauty, and dance. It's just awesome, isn't it? It's just awesome.
It is, totally. Wow. I hate to move past that. I think we should end here.
That's right. I mean, I've got some more time if you want to ask any more questions.
No. I think this was beautifully presented, and I thank you so much for your time. I mean, I do these sessions, and it just, I find that I've just learned so much, and it has me take a look or double take, on these things, and then afterwards I find myself going down the rabbit hole, seeking these things out, because I want to be like a sponge, when it comes to all of this stuff. And so that's what I hope the listeners get out of this. Well, I hope you enjoyed our episode with Dr. Percy. We did have some technical difficulties in the recording, so I hope it was not too much of an annoyance. I want to thank the Dean of Christ Church, Dr. Martyn Percy, for helping us close out our series. Please be sure to share this episode or any of your favorite episodes. We upload a new episode every Monday. Thank you so much for joining us on our musical journey. Remember, if it's Monday, it's Meet the Music. And oh yeah, stick around for a bonus soundbite from Dr. Percy.
I'm grateful, and for me, social activism is really important. And I've spent a long time in the church arguing for equality and gender, cross-sexuality, and also in public life as well. So I think political activism is really important, and I think I hope and I pray that our emerging generation also really understand that. And it's one of the most important pieces of education, actually, which is to say to people, actually, what you're going to get out of this degree course probably is going to benefit you, and it's probably going to increase your earning power in life.
Right.
But just forget about that for the moment and ask, now that you've got that privilege and that opportunity, how are you going to share it with others? And, and actually sharing your knowledge and the power that knowledge brings with the rest of the world. That's what education's for. Education is for transforming the world and making it a better place. It's not for improving myself personally. It's for making it better for everybody else.
Yes.
That's one of the great things about your show, Tom. Actually, it's pedagogically rich. It's about educating people and drawing people into a deeper relationship with music, and then them sharing their learning in ways that empower others. That's a beautiful thing.
Oh, well, thank you. My contribution to the world.
Absolutely.
Well, Martyn, I thank you so much again, and I appreciate your time, and I'll definitely reach out to Dr. Oliver to thank her for getting us together.
Thank you. My pleasure, Tom. Anytime. Do ask again. I'll be able to do that. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Be safe.
Okay. Thank you.